Hi, I'm Garnbreak1, and this is Midgardia's cool crowdfunding show. I'm here today with Josh Rosing. How's it going?
Pretty good.
I'm glad to hear it. So, you're here today to tell us about injuries and vile deeds, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So it's a combat supplement for 5th edition, or at least that's how it started. It adds better injury systems to D&D 5e. I actually, when I started creating them, forgot that there were in fact injury systems in the Dungeon Master's Guide, but I have since heard from other people that they are much better. And having gone back and looked at the injuries uh, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I'm not happy with those either. Um, Something I've found with what you'll find for injuries tables online, or also what they have in the Dungeon Master's Guide, is there's no connection between the amount of damage that you take as a character and the outcome of the injury. And so you can end up taking, 5 damage. I think in the Dungeon Master's Guide, maybe they're linked to crits or something. I don't fully remember. But you could take some small amount of damage and have that end up costing you a limb, or inflicting. I think the Dungeon Master's Guide also has it inflict like minor insanities and stuff too, which that's a whole different can of worms. I don't like that either. Um, but or in like online tables, you might even have benefits from being injured, or so you might take a ton of damage, have a benefit, or have a small amount of damage and have this like randomly large effect out of it. So what I went through, was this was actually originally inspired by the Star Wars Fantasy Flight Games system that has also has an injury system in it, and theirs is also a percent table, but what they did differently from normal percent tables is they have it scale with the number of injuries you take. So yes, you're rolling D%, but it goes from 0 to 150, and those really bad injuries are way up above 100. So you have to be hit with a weapon that is either going to increase your threat range for the injury, or have already suffered injuries for it to get really bad. So I took that and went into 5e with it. And so where I changed things a lot was, instead of having a percentile table, it's going to be different severities. So you might have a setback, and then dangerous, deadly, handicap, lethal, and then just outright death. And so in order to get those higher level injuries, you have to either have to take a lot of damage, like, nearing your max hit points at certain levels. At really low levels, it's actually going to be more than your max hit points. So you're almost never going to see those high level injuries unless you're already injured. And in fact, I recommend not playing with them at really low levels, just because, those minor injuries are enough to really be a threat to low level characters. But and then at higher levels, you're not likely to get them right away either, because you don't often take 100 points of damage in one go. But if you do, you probably should, have some effect from it. And so you're more likely to see, and in my own games, I've seen this as well. So I think the design is working as intended. Um, you're more likely to see that you get one of these minor injuries. So it might be like a sprained ankle type deal, where you have a minor penalty for one encounter, or even just one round of one encounter. And that injury is still there, but you've kind of, worked your way past it. And so you're still fighting. You still have that injury. When you get injured again, now it's worse. And then it gets worse and worse. And so it's really up to the players. How long do I push on before we just take a break? We say, okay, I'm resting for a couple days. I don't want any more. No more fighting.
Right on. Yeah, because one of the more infamous elements of D&D and other fantasy games is that you can just kind of take hits forever with no real issue. You're just sort of a big bag of hit points. But you also don't want to have it be like a horrible death spiral where, you take one hit and that makes you worse and that makes you worse and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing with these injuries is it does separate that concept of hit points and physical harm. So I know in older editions they specifically said this, but hit points really should be viewed as a stamina or luck, or I think someone mentioned hero points. You could consider them basically, how long can you avoid that damaging blow. And with injuries, you kind of, it adds this, okay, you could still get harmed while you're conscious, because in 5e normally there's no way of tracking physical harm. It's just that stamina, and you're fine until that final blow that knocks you out. And then once you're knocked out, then you can't fight. And then as soon as you have one hit point again, you're fine. Which that has some disconnect for some players, and that's, I think, where these injuries come in. You're more likely to get an injury if you're knocked out. So you might come back, but there's this sort of also again this balance of strategy where, do we want to use healing word right now? Are they just going to go down again and get injured again? What's is that a problem for us? So there's a little bit more kind of tactics that come into play here, and then on top of that, I've so far we've been talking about player character injuries, but there's also a whole system for monsters and PCs uses the same sort of core mechanic with a damage threshold, but whereas PC injuries are more random, in part to make the DM's job easier and also so the DM doesn't seem like they're just being evil and going like, I'm going to inflict this particular injury on you. Um, Players get the choice to when they attack, or you can use a feat to apply it to saving throw spells as well. And some spells in the book will also apply injuries directly. You get the option to declare an aspect that you want to target. So kind of like called shots worked, but I think much better than the way those were designed in the past. Um, and so you might choose attacks, or you might choose defenses, or special attacks, which would be something like a breath weapon, or you could choose something that isn't covered by all of those, and that would be a special injury. So it might be like a silencing blow to prevent the enemy from calling out for help. Um, and so you get to choose those, and so every round you might choose a different injury to inflict, or you might try to scale up that because they'll also have this scaling effect, right? So you might inflict a minor injury to their attacks, and the next round you inflict that same one again, but it gets bumped up to the next level. Or if you roll well enough on damage, you go straight to that level. And so you could potentially take off a troll's arm, for example, which they have regenerate. They can put it back on if they want to, but no one ever gets to do that. Mechanically speaking, it can be flavored as that, and people who are already playing with these with really descriptive combat, I think are going to really enjoy the system because it adds those mechanical rewards for it. And people who want that, who want to encourage descriptive play but don't have a good way of doing it, it also helps for that because now you're going, okay, how am I attacking them? It's not just I attack and I roll damage. It's I'm attacking, their sword arm, roll damage. Did I injure their sword arm?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, so as a fighter, I might try to like, punch a wizard in the throat to stop him from speaking so he can't cast a spell, or try
Yep.
and knock the legs out from under a fighter or something.
Right.
Right on. I'm very glad to see a 5e, kind of expansion book that aims to bring something to the table for our poor martial friends instead of just here's a ton of cool spells
Yes.
for the wizard. Yeah.
Yes. And there are a ton of cool spells in the book too. There's going to be at least 40 spells. And then also there's some layer spells in the book which are more DM focused, I suppose. But hey, if you're a villainous PC and you want to build your layer and enchant it for a year, go ahead. If you can pay that cost, it's in there for you. But yeah, I think those add some pretty cool like villainous layer effects as well. Outside of obviously you could design a creature with layer abilities. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, so like at first glance, you might think that this is entirely oriented at the gritty, like grimdark kind of campaigns, but this can fit really well in pretty much any genre of fantasy. Is that, fair to say?
yeah, absolutely. And what what helps with that is because the injury systems are sort of separate, you can opt to use one or the other. It will change the balance of your encounters, and you know, the goal of the supplement as a whole is to encourage a different way of thinking about combat in fifth edition. So, where you might be used to, okay, we can push through, I don't know, 4 encounters in a day, no problem. Now it might be, okay, let's cut that back to like 2, or, the difficulty of the encounter might now be, can the enemies injure us? If they can, now it's a real threat to like long-term planning versus if they can't, if they're not likely to injure you, if you're, I don't know, like 5th level characters and you're fighting goblins, now it's more of a like, okay, how many resources are we just like before. But there is still that threat of if we go down, maybe we get injured, and then that could put a damper on future planning.
Right.
um but if you don't want to play with the PC injuries, you can cut that out entirely. You can play a superheroic campaign where the player characters don't get hurt very much, but they're carving through enemies and applying these debuffs and everything. So you can still use it, both ways. Or if you want a really, really like grim dark campaign, you don't let the players injure the monsters. The monsters are so tough they literally can't get physically hurt. You have to like knock them out and then gut them to kill them. or you pay them or whatever, right? But the players, player characters aren't so safe. They could get crushed, you know. Uh, so
Yeah,
that's still an option. It's not my game, but
you're fighting
someone out
some
there is gonna
like
like it.
yeah, fighting some like horrible extra dimensional like aliens or demons or something. Just like you straight up can't destroy the corporeal form of them.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
sounds
and the
horrifying.
mechanics themselves are not necessarily, like you said, they're not necessarily specifically tied to settings. So if you were playing a, a space fantasy 5e game, you could absolutely apply all the effects. They've been worded in a, I think, descriptive but also generic enough way that you could change the flavor pretty easily without having to like redesign any mechanics.
Right, so if you're like slashing the leg off of something, it doesn't matter if it's like a giant space millipede with 1,000 legs. You're cutting off a good chunk of its legs in that
Yeah,
case. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
right on. I am. This is really cool. Also, the art is very nice. I like the cover. It that monster in the background that is horrifying. Is that in the book? I assume that's in the book. Like the
Yes,
crab
yes, that
claw.
is in the book. In fact, there is a I'll be teasing this later this week on Twitter, and probably at some point in an update on the Kickstarter as well. So I've been putting out daily teasers on my Twitter account with spells and feats and items from the book. So there's a spell in the book that is Conjure Blood Elemental. And so that is a blood elemental that is also in the book. Um, so as with all summoning spells, there's always the risk that if you lose concentration, it goes on a rampage. But what I really love about this spell is that it draws on your own injury to cast it. So if you're not injured, you can inflict an injury, like literally cut, deeply into your flesh to summon the being out of your body, or as a reaction to being hit with, an attack and becoming injured, you can just conjure an ally right then and there. So you can turn this like, oh no, I'm in a bad spot, into a, hey, we have another ally now. Also, it's terrifying. Let's hope I don't lose concentration on this spell.
I love that. That's horrifying. Uh, it's horrifying. Well, sorry. The blood elemental is terrifying. I cannot overstate that. Oh, he doesn't have a crab claw. That's a full hand there.
It's
Okay.
yeah.
I thought that was a crab claw at first, but yeah, no,
Hey, it could have one.
it
It's made of
could.
liquid.
It's
Can do whatever it wants.
it's made
They could be
of
a bladed
blood.
crab claw.
Heck yes. Yeah. So if you've ever played any game where you can slice limbs off of things, um, and who among us is not, I this is absolutely the game for you, or the supplement for you. Um, yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to bring up that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I guess just to generally cover everything that's going to be in there. So we've got the two injury systems. Obviously, we spend a lot of time talking about. That's the core of the supplement. But then from that, it's been expanded to have, there's going to be 200 new feats, items, spells, subclass for every class, and then dozens of monsters and villainous NPCs. Some of the villains are, kind of your generic, like, okay, this is a blood cultist, or this is a, you know whatever. There's going to be some that are kind of based on the subclasses. So there's going to be like some, the druid and ranger, for example, will have, NPCs representing who, their subclass in there. So like the druid is the circle of the grim harvest, and so that'll have I forget what I named them in the book, and then you've got like bloodthorn warrior as ranger, and so you'll have something representing them as well in the book. But then the unique ones like Altaira that you can see on the campaign page will have plot hooks as well, in addition to their normal, personality description and physical characteristics and whatnot. And so those plot hooks are to encourage you to think about adventures that you could use them in to more easily just incorporate them into your adventure.
I'm very excited for Evil Druid. There are not enough Evil Druids.
There are not enough druids that can actually use scythes.
That's also true. Uh, I this is quite the book. I had forgotten about all of the I focused on the injuries more than the vile deeds, but there is a lot here.
and it's not all villainous. Most of it is, but some of the spells are for, people who are preventing injuries, right? Some of the magic items are going to help you stop the injuries from happening. Oh, we've got monster templates in there too. There's going to be 3 monster templates at least that I have so far, anyway. So there's new vampires, the Fallen. So Zaphrax, Lord of the Fallen, is one of those. They are inspired by the Reavers from Firefly. They're absolutely horrifying. And then we have the Chain Spider, which is also inspired by a terrifying nightmare that I had. Uh, uh, Calling it a spider is maybe a little bit uh, um,
Inaccurate, close, but
inaccurate,
yeah,
misguiding.
yeah.
You can kind of think about it as as a humanoid that's been transformed through a terrifying surgical process involving magic that gives it the ability to control chains, kind of like Spider-Man has webs. They shoot spiked chains out of their wrists. Um, and can control, other chains as well. They can also turn chains into like a swarm of spiders that can then grab you and grapple you. If you defeat them, they just turn back into chains and fall to the ground. Um,
That
so yeah,
rules.
plenty of terrifying things straight out of my nightmares in this book. Um, yeah,
I mean, Nightmares and Firefly are two wonderful sources of inspiration.
definitely.
Sorry, it shoots spiked chains. That's horrific. I yeah, no, I adore this. And there's also VTT support for Shard as one of the reward levels, right?
Yes. Yep, it'll be on Shard for sure. If it makes sense to add it to other platforms, I'll do that as well. Some of them are more work than others. So that's why Shard is the first one that I'm doing. It's a little easier to get things on there. Um, but yeah, I really want to get it on Fantasy Grounds. I use Fantasy Grounds a lot. And I think the automation would work really beautifully if it could be set up properly for these injuries, but that's a whole mess of code that I would either have to spend a bunch of time working on or get someone else to do. So
Yeah, for sure. I've done a little bit of coding just for like Roll20. It's difficult. Not the easiest thing in the world. But yeah, there's also a bunch of other sweet stuff like reference deck, a wonderful pin. Enamel
yes,
pins
the
are
pins are
cool.
awesome.
Yeah. My cat is not included, but she is here. Hello. Um yeah. I This looks lovely. I'm lovely is not the word. This looks like a great supplement full of horrific brutality. Do not do not touch the mic. Yeah. It's been great having you on, Josh.
That's been great talking to you.
And yeah, there's a link in the description below. Go check this out. Go back it. I It's cool. And who doesn't like cutting arms off of things? Or perhaps my cat's tail. All right. Have, have a good one. Night.